from Lean Startups. I'm Jerry Strohmeyer, the Education and Training Program Coordinator for AME, and I will be your moderator. Our presenter is Brant Cooper, as Aaron Eden is unable to attend today, and our facilitator is Ken Rolfus. Brant Cooper has over 16 years of experience helping companies bring innovative products to market. He is the co-founder of Moves the Needle and the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Lean Entrepreneur. Brant is a sought-after speaker, startup advisor, and mentor. Ken Rolfus has over 35 years of senior operations management experience for public and private companies. He is the president of KDR Associates and has worked with businesses that design, manufacture, and market technically based products for the medical device, industrial product, and computer industries. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping items. You will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. You will see that you are muted on your attendee panel on the right side of your screen. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into your question area in the attendee panel and click on Submit. We'll review the questions and answer as many as we can, so feel free to participate in the conversation. When you log off today, please check your email inbox, and it will be an invitation and link to fill out a short webinar attendee survey. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey today, as your feedback is very important to us to improve future webinars. Brant has also graciously agreed to provide a PDF of today's presentation. We will be sending that along with a recorded link for a webinar replay to each of you this week. Now, I am pleased to introduce Brant Cooper and Ken Rolfus, who will present what we have learned from Lean Startups. Take it away, Ken.
Well, good morning, everybody, or I guess it's good afternoon to other folks. It's morning out here in California. Really very happy to have you guys join us today. What we've learned from Lean Startups kind of comes out of the Innovation Summit that we held out here in Irvine in March of this year, and Brant was one of our key speakers at the program. You know, the Lean Startup is relatively new. It was first proposed by Eric Ries in around 2011, I believe it is. Brant, you could probably confirm that. But what we really want to focus on is what we're looking at is building new products that transform and build our businesses. And as we all know, in new product development, particularly in lean new product development, we're really focused on two forms of waste that we want to get out of our systems. Number one is what we see in new product releases and such is an astounding percentage of new products come out and fail to return their cost of getting them out to the market in the first place, and many of them just outright don't quite make the market. So we want to be able to build products that people really want. And the second, so that, that's our first waste we want to get out of the system here. And then the second waste is that through the product development process, you'll see a lot of cycle times are extremely extended, and a lot of money is spent in recycling, rework, and such. And that's the other element of waste that's in this process. And one of the intriguing things in the Lean Startup activity is their focus is to attack those wastes and such. And so what I'd like to do now is turn this over to Brant. Brant has been into this activity for a while here, and I'd like to turn it over to you, Brant.
Okay, thanks, Ken, and thank you, Jerry. So. Welcome, everybody. I want to talk a little bit about what Lean Startup is and why this is starting to move into existing enterprises now, both large and medium-sized as well, but ones that are long-standing and ones that have perhaps been practicing Lean for quite a while now. And this did come out of the startup world, which is why it's called Lean Startup, but it now is penetrating into these large enterprises as we try to figure out how to do innovation inside of these large enterprises. And traditionally, The part that the two questions that kill more breakthrough innovation inside of large enterprises, what would those two questions be? Well, we typically try to answer, what's going to be my return on investment, and how quickly will I see that? And the problem with those two questions is that the only way to answer those questions is to look at existing markets. So the backdrop on all of this lean innovation really comes from Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, which is a book he wrote back in the early 90s, and I think it's still incredibly relevant today. And most of you all are probably familiar with it. But think of this as being a continuum. It's not binary, sustaining or breakthrough. And so many organizations, including startups, usually exist in between the two rather than on the polar opposites. But so over on the sustaining side, typically this is where large enterprises are. It's not a pejorative. This is actually where you want to get to, because that's where the large market is. That's where your margins are. And so the company has pretty much figured out its market. The market is well understood. The products are understood. The problems that are being solved are well understood. And the whole organization is optimized for executing on known processes inside the sustaining side of the market. Typically, there's a lot of competition there, and so you'll see that these companies often lead with branding rather than with product features. And they continue to innovate, perhaps over on the sustaining side, but the innovation is incremental or sustaining, and so it's incrementally improving existing markets or launching similar products inside of this well-known market. So when Clayton Christensen talks about the sustaining side, writes about the sustaining side, he used hard drives as an example. Because there was just a ton of data available in the 80s and 90s about from these hard drive manufacturers. And so if you imagine you're a large successful enterprise and you're producing these 5 1/4 inch hard drives back then, right, that only held 10 megabytes of data, and you sold tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of these hard drives to enterprises all over the world. Now, if you were a engineer or a scientist inside of this large organization, you could go to the business unit leader and say, listen, I think based on some things that we've discovered with materials and our existing processes, we can double the capacity of that 5 1/4 inch drive. I can give you an estimate about what the cost would be to double that capacity, go to 20 megabytes on that same 5 1/4 inch drive, and the business unit leader maybe sends his product team out or his sales team out and goes and talks to these enterprises that they sold the 10 megabyte version to. And so you're a product manager maybe, and you're talking to the IT manager of one of your top customers, and you're saying, hey, I've got this 20 megabyte hard drive. It's the same form factor. It'll slide right into the existing systems that you have. Are you interested? And the IT manager likely will say, yeah, my capacity is about done. I don't really want to have to go buy more servers. If I could double the capacity, that would be amazing. I love that idea. And so the product manager can go back to the business unit manager and say, yep, I think we're going to be able to sell another 100,000 of these. Customer says he's willing to pay $350 a unit. And you can build a return on investment case. You can build a business case for investing in that incremental innovation inside that existing market. So that's the sustaining side. The breakthrough side, the more disruptive side, is completely the opposite. So the market is not well known. The problems are not well known. The solutions are not well known. So you have a startup that perhaps can put a 20 megabyte hard drive together that is only the form factor about the size of an iPhone. It's 3.5 inches. And so, wow, look at the amazing technology. I can put 20 megabytes in a 3.5 inch form factor, and maybe the startup CEO goes out to that same IT manager, same IT director, and says, you've got all these big clunky servers and these big clunky hard drives. Look what I've got. I've got this 3.5-inch drive, and it holds 20 megabytes of data, and I can probably even sell it to you for less than that big old clunky 5.25-inch drive. And this IT manager looks at it and he says, oh, it looks like a paperweight. I have no use for it. It doesn't fit into any of my systems. You've wasted my whole morning. Please go away. And that CEO goes back to his office, and he's all bummed out. He's wondering, what's gone wrong. And a year later, that IT manager calls him up and says, I'm sorry I kicked you out of my office, but I need 1,000 of those things. I have these laptops now that I'm supporting out in the field, and that's the form factor of the hard drive I need. So a year later, this IT guy has gone against what he predicted, and what that says is that over on your breakthrough side, your disruptive side, the market isn't understood and it's not predictable. And so the business processes that you use over on the breakthrough side are different. You can't just go and ask your customers what they want. You can't just go ask your customers what they'd be willing to pay for or how much they'd be willing to pay. The business processes on the breakthrough innovation side are different than the business practices over on the sustaining side. And that's the big lesson here. We need to have different processes for the two different sides. And so, like I mentioned, the large successful enterprises are optimized for executing in known markets. And that's how they got where they are. Whereas the breakthrough, you need to be optimized for discovery. You need to be optimized for searching for the right answer to the problem. You must be searching for the right business model in a new market. And so we need to optimize differently over on the breakthrough side versus the sustaining side. So I also like to bring up, as if that weren't enough, today's market is actually kind of scary. There's a lot of crazy things going on. Competition is absolutely fierce. Your competition is attempting to move at the speed of the internet. And as we continue through economic transformation and technological transformation, this is only going to be more the case. We have to learn how to move at the speed of Twitter. And so this is not just on the breakthrough side. This is actually also on the incremental side. So as the internet, as technology becomes a bigger play throughout the organization, speed itself becomes the factor. And so how can we learn to innovate faster, both on the incremental side as well as over on the breakthrough side? And so this is where the lean startup principles come into play. So the three lenses I look at lean startup through is a deep understanding of customers, a purpose-built experiments, and data-informed decision-making. And so I'll go into each of these. But historically, lean has looked at the existing side of the marketplace. And so we've eliminated the waste by optimizing and making more efficient our value-add activities. And we've eliminated as many of the non-value-add activities as possible. But again, these are in known markets. So how do you eliminate waste, and what sort of waste are you trying to eliminate over on the breakthrough side, which is the unknown? And so what we talk about over on the unknown side is validated learning. And so you're wasting if you're not learning. And so as Ken mentioned earlier, you can very efficiently build products that nobody wants. And so on the uncertainty side, what we need to do is have processes that allow us to search and discover what it is that people will be using. What will they be willing to use? What would they be willing to pay for? And we want to do that before we invest in the development of these new products where we haven't validated that there's an existing market. But it's more than just the product development. There's, just as in lean, there's a value stream. All of these activities that you're doing that create value, so goes on the lean startup side. And so what we attempt to do is, can we hypothesize what our value stream will look like, and then break it down into components where we can actually discover and validate what these different value-add activities are, so that we're reducing the product cycle time to get the product out to the market, so it could be tested as we go along. The whole idea in the product development and the marketing and the selling is, rather than just executing upon what we think we know, we're going to validate incrementally throughout the process of building product, marketing, and selling it, so that new information can change the processes until we've established the known. So the idea is to move these items of uncertainty that exist over on the unknown side of the market, and move them over to the known side. And then, of course, once you're on the known side, these established organizations already have a well-oiled machine to be able to execute on the known. And so, again, really what we're trying to differentiate here is between how do we act on the unknown side versus how we act on the known side. And so part of this, part of these practices, we've got a tool here from the lean entrepreneur called the value stream discovery exercise. And from right to left, you can see that from a customer-centric point of view, there are 7 steps that a customer goes through from first becoming aware to becoming passionate about a product or a company's brand. And so each one of these steps, what we're doing is hypothesizing what are the business activities that we must do in order to move the customer through these steps. What is the customer behavior we expect that indicates that they have moved to each of these steps? And then how do we measure that behavior? And so again, this is the 3 lenses of Lean Startup: understanding the customer deeply, running purpose-built experiments, and then using data to inform our decision-making. So in each one of these steps, we are out learning from our customers so that we can develop the business activities we believe will resonate with the customers. So we hypothesize, and then we run an experiment in order to see if we're right. We have a specific metric in mind and a way to measure that metric to see if we're right. And if we're wrong, we iterate. And if we are right, then we can move on to the next step. Now, the problem with this particular model is that it looks like it's very linear, but of course it's not. We know it's not in reality, right? So the hopeful and satisfied part of it really is around the product itself. And so what we want to do is hypothesize what is the minimum viable product that we can build to answer the most pressing question about our business model. So in other words, what is the minimum features that we need to get in front of our early adopters so that we can measure the behavior that indicates that we're going down the right path? And so clearly, Ken, in the online startup world, that's often an app or an online product. And so the way this has evolved out of startups, people might be thinking, well, you can't really do this for jet engines. But the key is that in a minimum viable product world, viable is as important as minimum. And so an MVP is contextual with the type of business that we're talking about. So Ken, what do you think? Does this, how do you think that this relates to existing lean techniques?
Well, if you look at your slide there that has the continuum of awareness to passion, if you will, you know, what we're looking at here is really kind of a PDCA process. That's what it looks like. Is that correct?
What is a PDCA process?
Well, you know, we're generally looking at the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle of create a hypothesis, you know, kind of maybe build a model, you know, test it out and make adjustments. And what you're describing here is doing that you know, with your customer involvement in order to do this.
Right.
Now,
so,
you know, what you have here and what most of the lean startup activity has been around has really been, you know, consumer-related type of things. At least that's what we see in the media, if you will, right. And such. It's either consumer-related or mobile app related or software related, really like to get into the sense of hard products. You did say the minimum viable product has to be contextual, but what you have is you've got industries that are heavily regulated in the medical device and pharmaceutical and biosciences. You've got industrial that's, some of these products are fairly substantial to the customer and the user. And so how do you work that cycle, and how do you incorporate the customer in that?
Right. So it's a good point, and I like to point out first that customer development, as described by Steve Blank in 4 Steps to the Epiphany, was actually all enterprise software. Now, of course, it was still digital, it was still software, but it was really based upon the practices of businesses selling to other large enterprises, and that was Steve's career. Also, always my career was selling to large enterprises. So I think that while Eric Ries's experience were very consumer related, the very beginnings of this actually come from a business-to-business world. And I think that the first thing that I would point out is that what we want to try to do is get back to this concept of waste. And so the question that one has to ask themselves is that if you build, how much product could you build where if that product were wrong, would you be upset that you had just wasted the time, money, and resources for building that big of a product? So the question that you have to ask yourself is there an experiment that we can run prior to the investment of building that helps us validate that we're going down the right path? And so what's interesting is in today's world, there's actually all sorts of digital experiments that you could run that will also validate sort of these offline, larger manufacturing processes. I remember at this one Lean Startup Machine, which is a sort of a hackathon for teaching Lean Startup principles, there was a gentleman there that was talking to us about this this protein life science. It was life sciences. He had some sort of this protein testing process, but he wasn't sure exactly what proteins that he could actually would work in his process, in his tool. And so our suggestion was, well, run an ad in a trade publication, and talk about what your process does and the proteins that it does work with, and have a call to action where people will contact you or go to a particular page on your website and see if you can generate leads or customers that you can then talk to in order to validate what other proteins this would work for. So there are these ways to experiment using media to validate whether you're even going down the right path. And what's interesting is that these processes, these type of experiments are not new. Entrepreneurs have been doing them for ages. And a matter of fact, the very first personal computer, which is all hardware, was first marketed this way. Popular Electronics magazine was competing with one of these other magazines, and they really wanted to get the first personal computer on the cover of their magazine. And the guy that they contacted the guy that had invented this first one, and said, ship the product here, and we'll photograph it, and we'll put it on the cover of our magazine. And the guy had only built one, and he sent it via train to this publication, and it never arrived. So the history of the very first personal computer is that it maybe exists somewhere in some train facility, and this goes back to like 1978 or 79. And so they still used the image on the cover of the magazine. It was just a box with some fancy switches on the front and was completely empty inside. So that was sort of this, the early version of a smoke test where people are actually testing whether there's interest in this product without there actually really being a product anymore. And what's also amusing about that is that these two guys sent the inventor a letter and said, hey, we've written a version of BASIC for your computer. You should check it out. And the inventor was sort of like surprised because he knew very well that there had only been one built, and the only one that existed in the world was the version 2 that was sitting on his lab desk at the moment. So how could these guys have built software for it? And so he actually called them on the phone, and he called this phone number that they had left, and this woman answered the phone and said, no, I've never heard of the company Microsoft. I'm sorry, you must have the wrong number. And so it was Bill Gates and Alan that had actually sent that letter, and so they were actually kind of doing their own smoke test. So the point really is that there are all sorts of ways to validate whether customers would be interested in a product before you launch it. And we just had a roundtable here in San Diego, which is a big life sciences company, and the subject was around using these lean startup practices in life sciences, and I was very pleasantly surprised to find that there was a lot of people there that said that they were already doing it. And so clearly there are points in the process where you have to go through regulatory, and there's not a way to eliminate the amount of money that you're going to spend in doing that. But that's not what Lean Startup is about. Lean Startup is not about not spending money. It's about not wasting money, and there's a key difference there. And so again, my question would be, even in the life sciences side, wouldn't you want to validate, if there's market risk, wouldn't you want to validate the market for the product before you spent the money to develop the product and go through the regulatory process? So again, that's the elimination of waste aspect. And again, so the question that people need to ask themselves is, what are the experiments that we can do that will take less time and less money, that actually takes an assumption that's in the unknown side and moves it over to the known side? And that's how we it's using sort of these scientific method to discover on the unknown side, so that we're not wasting by producing something that we don't know will work, or we don't know there's a market for, or we don't know how to market it, or we don't know how to sell it.
Well, as an example, I had a product that I was working on some years back on intrauterine pressure catheter, for example, and the way the market products were out there were very cumbersome for the practitioners to use. So we created an assumption that said, okay, if we wanted to do this, we would want to take the pain out of the usage, I guess. Right. And so we made a proposal, and the proposal is that we would put a solid-state transducer at the tip of the catheter, which changed how the thing looked, changed the whole thing. So the question was, would anybody want this thing? Right. So what we did is, and we couldn't really just walk out and ask them. We had to show them what we were talking about. So we made some pretty crude models and went to 4 of the top obstetrics folks in the country that we had business with, and said, hey, what do you think about this? What does this look like? This is what we're trying to do. What do you think about it? And this is what it would look like. And we were absolutely stunned by the response. And what stunned us was we expected them to be happy about taking the cumbersome process out of there. But what really changed, what really hit us was they said, hey, we've been looking for something here with a tip that's less sharp because of the danger of using it, and to be able to position it properly. And so we came back with what we thought was obvious from the usage of it. We came back with, wow, the feature they really like is what we thought was going to be a problem. Amazing. And this was actually, we had to make these models kind kind of crudely, it was before the 3D printing, type of thing. I think today with 3D printing, we should be able to make models a lot easier, to show and tell. And this is, obviously was in a regulated industry requiring the FDA release to be able to sell the product. So,
right. Yeah, no, it's a great example. And what was interesting at this roundtable also is that there are people out there who think in these terms of, hacking the process. And so in sort of the startup world, hacking means that you are looking for ways to, sort of cut through red tape or try to figure out ways to leverage the existing processes. And there were people talking about the regulatory process, that actually once you have this approval, that there are versions of the product that then you can actually change parts of the product without actually having to go back and getting immediate approval for those changes. And so that even once you've gone through the process once, it actually then gives you this flexibility of running all sorts of other experiments to ensure that you're actually building it in a way that people want. And so even that part of it is it's concentrating on, again, it's, to me, to belabor the point, it's the unknown versus the known, and being able to experiment on the unknown side to try to work through these kinks before you spend too much time and money investing in the process. But so that's a great example. There's a case study in my book about a manufacturing company that was building factory automation visibility, like cameras and servers that actually will take images of the manufacturing process so that you can monitor whether things are going correctly. And they had all sorts of assumptions about the way their customers wanted to use this platform. And so they were going down this path of building this huge SaaS product with all of this functionality that was at a lower cost than the platforms that existed out there because it was SaaS mostly. And we're building these specific amounts because their assumption was that the customer would want professional services to come in and implement it, put all these cameras in place and be done with it. And so before they were done with this process, they went out to a couple of their primary customers, and the customers were saying, no, actually, if what you could do is build us a way that we could move the mounts for these cameras, then that would be huge. And if you could give us these APIs that allowed us to write sort of our own software to get the data that we wanted, that would be huge. And so they did this major pivot, and using 3D printing, they were able to, through several iterations, come up with these variable mounts that allowed the factory themselves, the company themselves, to move the cameras around as needed. And then, of course, with the API, it was relatively easy to write code that allowed them to get exactly the data and see it the way they wanted to do it. And, of course, any big win is for a company to become a platform. And so what was interesting is it really launched this company down to this different business model where instead of offering sort of this SaaS product only with these stable mounts, they were able to provide all of this custom mounts that are produced in a very short order with 3D printing, plus a platform that allowed their customers to develop on top of that. So that's also sort of a hardcore manufacturing company that used these lean startup type principles. And one other example that I'd like to say, a show that's even outside the product development, but is inside this value stream discovery. So most of the time when we're doing workshops, for example, we try to put together these cross-functional teams so that you have engineers and marketers and product managers and sales and even customer service if necessary, as well as even internal operations. And so we were working with this manufacturing company that were building mold monitors, make sure molds were closing properly and that sort of thing. And this one team was only engineers. And so we had sort of slipped through the cracks that we had only engineers on this team. And they were, after the first part of the workshop, they were sort of upset because they felt like the problem and solution that they were given was steering them towards what they always got steered towards, was producing new products. And yet they were insisting that, no, we think that we already have the products necessary to solve the problem. And so what this team of engineers did was sort of run experiments against the sales process and discovered that salespeople weren't properly positioning some of the existing products that would solve this particular problem. And so what I love about that story is that if you get the right people together, you can actually figure out things inside your value stream. And it's the engineers that could be helping the sales, and it's the sales that could be helping the engineers. And so I know, Ken, this is something that you and I have talked about in just lean in general, is this horizontal strategy that starts with the customer, from the customer's perspective, so that you can get all of the team members aligned to solving that customer problem. And if we organize in silos, then we're losing the opportunity for engineers to engineer solutions, and for sales and product marketing people to provide input from what they're learning from the market. And so the Lean Startup is very much in support of these horizontal, cross-functional teams where everybody gets to contribute to solving customer problems.
Well, what it sounds like what you're describing is the in a lean management system, what you're really focused on is creating value for your customer. So it's very customer centric, and so the line of sight that everyone has, whether you're in the HR department or product development department or manufacturing, has to be focused on that customer. So let's kind of, I see you just flipped up another item up on the screen there. Take us, Brant, through, okay, we've talked philosophy and that sort of thing. Take us through, you got a project, you got something you're working on. How do we go about, how are you going to do this stuff?
Right, so great question. So there's a number of tools out there. Some of these are moves the needle tools, other ones are not moves the needle tools. So I think people need to find what works for them. And what I actually love about it is that the tools right now are in analog mode, and I think that that's important and really harks back to the early days of lean manufacturing even, that there's value for having tools that the teams can gather around, and that the metrics and the different ways that we're measuring our progress are public and open and collaborative. And so that's really sort of where we are in the lean startup world as well. There are electronic tools too. My personal opinion is that they're sort of, the cart leading the horse. We probably will get there, but right now we've got a series of analog tools. And so this first one I have up on screen is Lean Canvas. It's built off by Ashmore, and it's built off of Alex Osterwalder's The Business Model Canvas. The Business Model Canvas was originally developed for describing existing business models in large enterprises. And Ash's take here is, well, can we change it to being more startup-like? And so this is a way simply to document your assumptions, and then over time your progress around validating what your assumptions are, or invalidating your assumptions. And so we have a number of boxes here, and the idea is simply to, again, document what do you think the problem is that you're solving, what is your idea around the solution, things like how you think it's different from the existing solutions out there, what are your customer segments that you think you're going to go after, and hopefully even your early adopters. What are your hypotheses around the way that your customers would expect to buy your product? So is it via the web? Is it via a field sales? Is it inside sales? Is it a combination of these things? Is it through systems integrators or VARs? And then we get down to, well, how are we actually going to make money, and what does the price need to be, so that we can come up with what a profitable business model eventually. Those bottom two elements in my mind are not ones that you want to worry about right away. That would be sort of getting back to that, when am I going to see the return on investment? What we really want to do is concentrate on key metrics that are like, well, is it solving the customer's problem? Are their customers using the product like we think they're going to use it over time? and are there additional market segments that we should be looking at? And there's a number of growth metrics that we want to look at before we establish the rules around profitability, simply because scale often brings profitability that you don't have on your initial when you're sort of at the size of the startup. So the idea here is that this is like each team that is working on an idea would be using a tool like this. The idea is that you're starting small, just like a startup. So you're not. This isn't a 100-person organization that's using this canvas, but at this point, usually at the beginning, it's a team that's evaluating the core assumptions of their business model. So lean canvas. This next tool is.
Brant, before you go a little bit too far, what you're.
Okay.
I guess a couple things. One is we're moving along in time here, but what you're showing here is something different than most of us have really looked at here, and that is the concept of the business model in which you're operating in. Okay, and a lot of folks, really don't get involved in that. They're a part of it, they're a piece of it, and such, but they don't look at the whole business model here. So how important is this more holistic look to this whole activity or this whole approach?
Right. Mostly for the breakthrough innovation side. So if you're tending towards the breakthrough innovation side, these type of tools become more important, and it's sort of like what I was saying earlier, that you can't measure your breakthrough innovation sides using the same criteria that your successful products are using, inside the sustaining side. There's just no way that the breakthrough is going to measure up. And so this is a way for teams to evaluate the progress on the breakthrough side without simply looking at return on investment over a short period of time. What's amazing is that out in the startup world, we find that we see a startup that we know and love. We typically only see them after they've reached this tipping point and the boulder's rolling downhill and it's all success and it looks like an overnight success. We don't see, King Sisyphus rolling the boulder uphill and it's rolling back down on him it takes startups 5 to 7 years typically before you start seeing them out in the market and where they're getting this product market fit and they're getting momentum, and now we're hearing about them. And so it's important that businesses start to have that sort of time horizon, and they need to separate these startup teams so that they're measured differently. And so again, ideally it's a cross-functional team. They're acting like a startup. And so if you're acting like a startup, you are responsible for the business model aspects. It's not turning it over to the core business. You're responsible for going and finding who your early adopter customers are. You're responsible for learning from your customers the way they expect to be marketed and sold to you. It's your responsibility to figure out what is the engagement with that product that indicates that you're actually solving a problem. And it's your responsibility to develop what is going to be the cost of acquiring these customers and what is going to be the lifetime revenue that I get from this customer. It's up to that startup team. And so
well, doesn't this then provide some framework and guidance for the group to say, okay, who should be on my team? What disciplines should be represented on our team? Because I might know product design, but I don't know sales channels. I don't know other aspects of it. So doesn't this provide you some guidance?
It does. It provides guidance for who might be on the team. But I tell you what, the most important aspect of it is that you have people that are entrepreneurial minded. And Ken, when I work with large organizations, has not been one yet where there are not a number of entrepreneurial, creative, innovative people that are working at that company regardless of what their job description is or their title is. So yes, I think you should look at the team and say, listen, if we're going to be running digital experiments, we need somebody that can help us there. And you know, if we believe that design is going to be important, it would be great if somebody has UX skills and engineering skills and these different skills. I think that they are important, just in the same way that if you were building a startup, you would look for these different skills. But the bottom line is that inside of a startup, you have people that are wearing many hats early on. So you might be starting inside these organizations. What we see, it often starts with one person who's got an idea, and we're empowering that one person to start running experiments. And then that one person goes and tries to find 2 or 3 other like-minded people. And the number one qualification of these people is that they're willing to wear multiple hats and that they're willing to be entrepreneurial and move the product forward as they're trying to validate and invalidate their assumptions. But the lean canvas is something that you tack up on the wall, and you use Post-it notes maybe to put your assumptions in there, and then over time you're updating those assumptions for everybody to see and put it in a public place where people that are not even aren't even aware of what you're up to can see that there's this ongoing innovation that's happening, and it's pretty cool.
Okay, so we're got about 15 minutes left here. I want to do a couple things here. One is encourage people. There's a question section that you can type your questions in there. We'd like to get any questions you might have. But in the meantime, you know, how would you recommend a company, you know, get started with this?
Yeah, so I think that my hypothesis is that there are a number of people that are entrepreneurial inside of these organizations, and so if someone in our audience is that way, the best thing they can do first is to find like-minded people, and hopefully one of those people would be a senior leader, but seek them out, and so create a monthly lunch or a monthly happy hour, or use something like meetup.com to actually market and try to find the like-minded people inside the organization is step one. And it doesn't have to be 50 people. It literally can be 5 people. It could be 3 people. I think that what the people will find is that as they do that, it will grow, and you'll find more people that are interested, and some of those people will only pretend to be interested. They won't really know if they want to do these things, but again, I believe that's the first step. The second step is to create the first experiment. So this could be with an existing project, and it could be a customer-facing project, or it could be an internal project. So we've done training and consultation with HR departments, with IT departments, with finance departments, with legal departments inside of large organizations. And so those organizations should be treating their internal employees as customers. And so you can be a lean startup inside of a large organization that is customer facing in the sense that they're only facing their existing employees. And so you can run experiments. You can set up landing pages. You can, again, do some sort of a meetup to see whether you can get people to attend. So an experiment could be as simple as creating a hypothesis. I believe that if I do a monthly lean startup or lean innovation lunch and learn, that the first one I'll get 10 people there. So that's an experiment. And so what we have on screen here is our experiment loop map. The leap of faith assumption is like, well, what's got to be true, or my business idea doesn't work, and so that would be, simply my leap of faith assumption is that if I do this meetup, people will attend. You have your hypothesis about how many people will attend. You run your first experiment that you're going to send an email to maybe an internal group that you're allowed to send email to see if people will attend a meetup, and you can measure their behavior and see what the results are, and then once they come, you talk to them, and you get these insights. So sort of the insights, similar to the way Ken discovered that the feature he thought was going to be a problem was actually the one they were really interested in. So always want to document your insights. And so this is step 2, in my opinion, is to run an experiment. So you found 3, 5 people that are like-minded, run an experiment on the internal employees or run an experiment around something that's externally facing, customer facing. The key there is to make sure you're targeting just your early adopters. You're not broadcasting something out to the whole world. You're really in search of the people that are going to understand the problem that you're trying to solve and want to be part of that. So those are the first 2 steps to get started. I think that the third step is to find that senior leader if you weren't able to do it, and then once you have run your experiment a couple of times, now you have this data that you can start showing leaders, and you're essentially training the leaders how to look at data as evidence and not just return on investment. And so what you're trying to do is train the leaders to be able to, how can they monitor project process without looking simply at revenue, and those 3 steps are really how to get going.
Okay, good. Well, if we look at kind of step back and say, do you have some examples of companies that are that are outside of the web-based and type of startup or software type startup that have carried this through, or are we still in more anecdotal evidence at this point?
Well, I think it's all sort of anecdotal in the sense that people are talking about it. But I mean, Intuit is sort of leading the way. Most of their products are electronic and customer facing, though one of their biggest wins really was around an internal group, the finance group of all groups, running an experiment on a problem that basically they had all of these customers whose credit cards were expiring, and the back-end systems were sort of falling apart in terms of notifying these customers, or and so basically people would be running payroll, and they would small businesses would be running payroll, and they'd have no idea that that their credit card was expiring, and when it came time to payroll, they weren't able to do it because their connection to an Intuit product had gone away. And so a team, just as an experiment, started calling these small businesses on the phone, trying to figure out what was actually going on. And this was like back in 2008 or 2009. And what was interesting is, sort of in this realm of understanding customers deeply, what they found out is that a lot of these small businesses this was right after the financial collapse, and they were really struggling. And so they had a whole series of credit cards that what they would try to be doing is rotating expenses on these credit cards just so that they could stay open for business. And it actually created a lot of empathy inside of Intuit around what are some products and services that we can help these small businesses stay alive. So it went way beyond simply that the credit cards were expiring. There was this crazy story where they called this one woman, and they were saying, we've got this, your credit card for your payroll is about to expire, or it has expired, and she's all like, oh, that credit card is in a block of ice in my freezer. And so Intuit people are, wait a sec, did I hear that right? A block of ice? What is a credit card doing in a block of ice? And basically it was the credit card that had the highest credit limit on it, and she would get into trouble if she just had that in her wallet because she would charge everything to it. And so she actually put it in a block of ice and had no idea that it was about to expire, and payroll was not going to go through. So kind of extraordinary story. But I think that that's a great example of the fact that all of these businesses have to go out and interact with real live customers in order to understand what are some of these impacts that solving a problem would have on the lives of the buyers or on the careers of the B2B buyers, or what is the impact that solving problems will have on these customers. And that's really the first step towards producing even incremental innovation, but also these breakthrough innovations on a larger scale. But there's a lot of other companies that we've been working with, Capital One, GE, a clothing manufacturing, or actually not even clothing, but a material manufacturing company in the Midwest, Georgia Pacific, which again is not digital. So there's all sorts of companies that have practiced lean in the past, but what they really need to do is to eliminate waste in determining whether these products are actually going to be successful in market.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add what the key concept here is that you're really focused on the customer, and what you're talking about here means that you have to have made your pick of the right customer to talk to. And if you look at in the B2B world, if you will, there are multiple contingencies of customers that you have to deal with in your cycle, if you will. So, for example, I spent a lot of years in the medical device industry, and so our customers were the distributors, the big distributors, the hospital administrators, the operating room nurse, the physician, and such. So there's a lot of players involved in these kind of markets, and it's not too different than other markets. What customer are you focusing on here?
Well, this is why selling B2B is so complicated. You have to, all of those people are part of your selling process and your marketing process, and you have to be solving the problems of all of those people. And we actually encourage people to use a tool like this, the customer Zoom tool, where you're actually able to drill down into who these individual people are. And if you have a process where you have multiple touch points inside of a selling process, you should have a picture of whoever your Thomas Edison equivalent is for each step. And you have to understand what that customer needs and what drives them, right? I used to try to sell products versus an 800-pound gorilla in the enterprise space. And the directors and VPs of IT would lose their job if my product didn't behave and perform better than what my 800-pound gorilla was. And so it was a classic case of, well, you never get fired for hiring IBM, right? So it was a very difficult sale for us because they would literally have to forklift out the competitor's products and put our stuff in. We were way less expensive and way superior of a product, but the risk of that person's job was dependent upon that switchover. And so that was what we had to overcome, not simply return on investment, not simply the type of alerts that we could generate. And so people need to understand all of the different players inside of their process to that degree. And so we use the customer Zoom tool to try to focus in on that. And it's a complicated process and it's long, but if you don't understand these individual people down to their unique traits and their behaviors and what the problem is that theirs that you're solving and the impact that solving those problems will have on that person, the distributor, the nurse, the head doctor, all of these have to be into consideration or you're going to run across objections in the sales process. So all of these things can be hypothesized, can be tested upon, can be documented so that you're putting together a roadmap that once the product is developed, it's marketed correctly, and the salespeople that are brought on to put that, to go into these organizations has a blueprint already established on how to market and sell to these individuals.
Okay, well, I think we're running up on our bit of time. I want to thank Brant. I guess, Jerry, do we have any questions that we need to cover real quickly before we leave?
Actually, no, we're good to go. And thank you, Brant and Ken, for a very insightful presentation. Very exciting information. And this brings our webinar to a close. And our next webinar is scheduled for October 15th, titled Leadership, Making Lean a Success. And please note the earlier start time. For webinars, visit the AME.org under AME Events and Training tab for more information and to register. And don't forget to fill out the short survey that will be in your inbox. Please check out our recently redesigned AME website. Go to AME.org to register for events, the November AME Jacksonville Conference, participate in a discussion, or to add a query to the benchmarking community practice. You will find something of interest for you at AME.org. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a very productive day.